Okay, so thank you very much for coming this evening. Hopefully today, this evening I'm going to give you a different perspective of South Georgia. So I've been down here for the last few years doing a coastal habitat mapping project for Falklands and South Georgia Island. It's a Darwin funded project, so funded by UK government and also supported by the FIG Environment Fund. So we've got quite a few partners involved. I work at SARI. We have South Georgia Government, Oregon State University, JNCC in the UK, Shallow Marine Surveys Group and Falklands Government. So I guess over the next 50 minutes to an hour, hopefully get to see a different side of South Georgia. So this is South Georgia. This is quite a rare image. It's from the Sentinel satellite, operated by the European Space Agency, captured on the 22nd of February 2018. Quite rare because there's no clouds around.
Neil, you've got massive echo. I don't know if you can. Something's wrong with the sound. You've got a real echo.
Yeah?
Do you want to take it off and try it?
Is that better?
I don't know if people at the back can hear, but it's massive.
I think because you're at the front though, that's probably worse. Is it echoing over there? It's bad.
Switch the mic off and just use the power of your voice.
Yeah.
Okay, although they're videoing it.
You still won't be able to hear it.
No. Is that better? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, so this is South Georgia. It's taken as an image capture on the 22nd of February 2018. Quite rare because there's no clouds around, apart from the northern tip. But this has been really instrumental for the project, the coastal mapping project. We've used this to create broad-scale habitat maps for the island. They're the first satellite-derived habitat maps that are out there. I said the project spans both Falklands and South Georgia. That was the data we've been using for the broad-scale maps. But also, as well as the broad-scale maps, we've been creating fine-scale habitat maps as well. And really that's been guided by stakeholder prioritisation, which I'll come to in a bit. So really my mission within South Georgia, within the coastal mapping project, was twofold. We had to go and collect ground validation data. So that was to train those habitat models. You have the imagery, and you then need your models predict what habitats are there, but you need to train those models with ground validation data. So that was the first, I guess, goal of the mission. And the second goal of the mission was to collect fine-scale imagery using drones to create those maps in areas of need from a stakeholder perspective. So that might be Government of South Georgia, for example, from a tourism perspective, but there was other stakeholders involved as well. Can you hear me okay? Yep. So these are the broad-scale maps that we've created through the project. This is available on the South Georgia Government WebGIS system. You can see the green area is the coastal tussock fringe, and the other habitats are dotted around, but you can really see the central part of South Georgia is focused on Nick. Okay. The central part of South Georgia is focused on, well, basically it's ice, glaciers and so on. So it's a real coastal fringe. So we had a fairly significant workshop at the end of last year, trying to understand where stakeholders needed these fine-scale habitat maps. We've got a clear steer. The report's available on the project website, and we knew where we needed to go and collect additional data from this expedition. Now, I guess really important, the expedition was part of a wider work being done by the South Georgia Heritage Trust. So it was a South Georgia Archaeological Project expedition, I guess, first and foremost. We were able to piggyback on that. We could contribute to the expedition. I could contribute my expertise by collecting drone imagery, which was helping the archaeologists do their field surveys. But at the same time, it gave me the opportunity to actually get to South Georgia and go and collect the data that I needed to get as well for the project. So it really highlights the importance of collaboration. Getting to South Georgia is pretty tricky, so you need to take any opportunities you can to get down there. It's a long way, it's very expensive, and boat support is also expensive as well. So really the take-home message is, yeah, use vessels opportunity if and where available. And we had really valuable support from Iridium Communications and Melisel. They gave us a big, generous data package, which meant that we could change our drone missions and download other data sets through the satellite broadband. And also we could do a lot of outreach, sort of for social media and the public. And also, I guess, stay in touch with friends and family. So it's quite important, well, South Georgia, when you do research there, you have to get a regulated activity permit, a RAP. Particularly drones, because I guess South Georgia being a very diverse wildlife community, there's a lot of seabirds around, very sensitive to disturbance. So it's important that any work that you do is assessed. You look at the risks and try and identify mitigation measures to try and mitigate any impacts that you may have. So we worked with South Georgia Government to get our RAP, but also we worked with Air Safety Support International. It's a subsidiary of the UK Civil Aviation Authority to get the drone permit. And they want to make sure that you've got competent pilots, that you have plans in place, that you have visual observers to make sure there's any hazards around wildlife or albatross and so on. So we've got those sorted and we're pretty much set. So this is us getting ready to set sail on the 22nd of February last year. Sorry, this year, not last year, 2019. I guess there was a lot of safety briefings, clearing customs, getting all our stuff lashed down for the passage. And then we were off, so we left on the evening. And I guess once we were out, cleared Port William, the sea started to pick up. People disappeared, never to be seen for 5 days. There was excitement, and some people emerged to see the first icebergs as we passed the convergence. But it was pretty rough, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not normally sick on boats, but I was sick. The Hans Hansen moves a lot, is all I would say. But yeah, she's a very capable vessel. But that gives you the idea of how much she was moving. There were some nice distractions on the way though. So we were accompanied by a pod of hourglass dolphins as we neared South Georgia. They didn't seem to care about the weather at all. They quite enjoyed it. And as we were approaching South Georgia, it was night time. Obviously there's icebergs around, so from a safety at sea perspective, it's important that the vessel master knows where the icebergs are. Obviously you have radar, but also there's smaller chunks of ice. So we had to have the spotlight on as we were approaching South Georgia. And obviously there's a danger then of bird strikes. So we had a few South Georgia burrowing diving petrels landing on deck. So they were, I guess there's protocols to deal with these. They were boxed up, put somewhere safe, and when we arrived in South Georgia, they could then be released safely. But they do have very cool blue feet. So this was my first view. We obviously arrived about 3 o'clock in the morning. You'd hear the anchor chain go down, and then the next morning, first light, sort of got out your cabin, and you're greeted with this. Yeah, it's pretty stunning. This is El Zahal, so at the northern tip of South Georgia. Steep cliffs, and then it turned to that. So you know you're somewhere cold. And I guess it did that probably for the next 2-3 days. So that obviously paid to doing any drone mapping at the start with. But there's a lot of stuff we could do as well, so that was fine. South Georgia has very strict biosecurity protocols. There's reasons for that. There's been a lot of money and resource put into clearing the island of rats, rodents. So we need to make sure that we're not carrying any rodents on board. There's traps which are checked. But also from an invasive species perspective, there's a lot of work happening in research looking at invasive species on South Georgia. So there was a lot of checking, biosecurity checks you have to do. So also going through Velcro on your jackets, on your the padding on your rucksacks to try and check there's no seeds or anything on board. And that even went through to scrubbing all the pegs that we're going to be putting in the ground for sort of instruments and equipment and stuff. So once those checks were done, we got to go ashore for the first time, and this was a scene that greeted us as we came ashore at El Zahal. I'd never seen fur seals before, and there's an awful lot of them. The pups were everywhere, very inquisitive. Some of them are quite bolshy, but most of them run up to you then run away again afterwards. But they give you bodgers, I guess, sticks to protect your ankles as they approach you. We sort of de-kitted the boat. The penguins seemed more interested in the kit than us, really. They were trying to work out what was inside the boxes. And I guess once the archaeology started, so El Azhar was a big site for the archaeologists. There was an old sort of sealing station there. They were more interested in seeing what the guys were excavating. And it's one thing, obviously, to try and maintain your distance from wildlife, but when you're busy excavating holes and the penguins creep up behind you, it's a different challenge, really. That's Andrew, one of the archaeologists from Cambridge, working on one of the dig sites. So while the digging was happening, obviously there was fairly high winds. We had a lot of rain and snow, so we weren't able to do any drone surveys right at the start. I had a lot of ground validation that I had to collect, so it involved a lot of walking around. We walked across, myself and GIF, the guy who was there to assist me. We walked over to Undine Harbour, which is across on the other side of South Georgia Island. So I guess we did transverse South Georgia. It's about a kilometre. I guess that's a tick in the box. But to me, this is what I thought South Georgia would be like. There was ice on the beach. There was full of penguins and fur seals, and yeah, it was really stunning. It was amazing. There's a very cute fur seal pup that was enjoying the sun. And this is South Georgia pipit. It's the most southerly songbird. This has been one of the success stories from the rodent eradication project that happened a couple of years back. These were really impacted by, as they're ground nesting birds, by the rats and mice. So actually, through that eradication, these have really come back, and they were literally everywhere in Al Azhar and Undine. So yeah, we saw them all around the island. So that's I guess, a real success story. These guys are flying around. This is a light-mantled city albatross and chick. This is just in El Azhar Harbour. And as we were doing our walking around collecting the ground validation data with our GPS, we have a smartphone app that we can record the habitats on. We got to peer over into Hope Valley. So this is the next, I guess, valley long from where we were, but it just looks absolutely stunning. The moss habitats were really pretty. And these guys, this is Hope River going out down into Undine Harbour, and these fur seal pups were just exploring and having a whale of time. So finally the weather cleared, so we set up these, that's me setting up the ground control points for the drone survey. So we can take heights from these, apply these to data once we process the data, and we can create a digital elevation model from our drone imagery. And this is really useful for the archaeologists. They got a really detailed plan from the drone imagery of the site they were excavating. This is just a quick pan round to show you El Azhar. You'll see the vessel soon in the background. So the drone mission we flew here was at 50 metres above ground level. It was a fairly small mission. I guess we were fairly limited by the weather window, but really the priority from the archaeological perspective was to get a detailed image of the site. So this is a 3D dense point cloud of the data we collected. So this is created from probably about 2,000 still images that are processed together to create an orthomosaic. I think what always surprises me is just the detail you can get from these images. So flying at 50 meters, the resolution of the image is about 1.5 centimeters per pixel. So we can zoom in. This is a detailed area, I guess, overview of the dig site. So in the center, that's where the 3 tripods are, which you'll see in a bit. There was another structure further down on the bottom that was being excavated as well. And really, these images will show you why the archaeologists were so keen to get to South Georgia as soon as possible. So this is El Zahal in the 1970s. You can see that there's obviously dense tussock growth. There's a hut in the background, and you'll see some tripods in the next image, and they're actually located by the hut where the blue and orange bags are. But as obviously sealing ceased a lot earlier on, and as the seal numbers increased, they started to erode the tussock habitat. So this is at El Zahal in the 1990s. So you can see that all the tussock around it is gone, and the tripods, which they used to render down sort of seal blubber, is now sort of at ground level. But then the change to now in 2019 is quite staggering. So that's all been eroded through fur seal activity. And I guess a lot of the structures underneath the tripods were being exposed, and that there was a real need to get there as soon as possible to try and document and capture what was there before it was destroyed forever. These are some of the dig photos taken by the archaeologists from Cambridge. So there's a lot of detail that they were excavating beneath the tripods, the hearth, the fire to render down the seal blubber. They were creating detailed plans, both from their own drawings, but also from using the drone imagery that we'd collected. And it was real painstaking work they went through. I'm not an archaeologist, but yeah, it was fascinating really to see the detail they went through, what they were documenting, what they were archiving. And these were some of the citizens and scientists who they effectively funded the trip. So they were getting involved in the dig. And then after about 4 days, we pretty much finished up and it was time to move on. So Dion Ponce was sort of the expedition leader on board on the Hans Hansen. So his father turned up on the Golden Fleece. He'd just come back from Antarctica. That was quite nice. I think I hadn't seen him for like God knows how many months. And then we're off. So then we moved to Bird Island. So this is just a time lapse as we anchored up, ready to go ashore. You can see it's still pretty lumpy through the passage. And then in the distance, you'll see the Pharos SG arrive. So the Pharos was on a stakeholder trip with Nigel and Emma and other VIPs. So they were being picked up from the Bird Island base. You'll see some fast craft zoom past, picking them up. There we go. Comes back. Goes again. And then finally it was time for us to go on board. And you can see now the blue sky. So I've obviously never been to Bird Island before, but apparently it's very cloudy, very windy. It's right at the northern tip of South Georgia. So to have really blue skies and no winds was, apparently we were very lucky. And yeah, it was pretty amazing. It meant we could do a lot of work on using the drones, which I'll show you in a bit. But this is Bird Island itself, the base. There were fur seal pups everywhere. It was quite interesting. They had a sign warning you about those cute guys that were sitting behind the door. And this was a really nice story. So Ollie Prince was he was a South Georgia Heritage Trust guide on the board. His father used to work at the base, and then obviously he was quite an eminent researcher. They named a building after him after he passed away. So Ollie had been in the bay 3 times, but hadn't actually been ashore. So it was quite nice that he actually got to go ashore and I guess see where his father used to work. So then we got down to do some droning. So this was GIF, taking the wind measurements. When you're doing drone surveys, you are limited sort of within operating guidelines what winds you can take off in. And I guess part of that is documenting weather and so on. So GIF was out there getting the wind measurements. It wasn't very windy. And this was our first, I guess, foray into Bird Island, so taking off next to the base. You'll see some of the guys on the stakeholder trip walking down the jetty as they're waiting to get back onto their fast craft that you saw zooming backwards and forwards on this time lapse. And then you can see the Pharos in the background. That's a Hans Hansen vessel in the foreground. There's a handy iceberg blocking the channel where the boats were coming in and out. And on the next clip, while I was quite interested in mapping, I guess, the entire area around the bay, the archaeologists were quite keen to get to this bay on the other side of the, I guess, the other side of the main bay. So this was where I guess there were some relics of sort of ceiling hut which had been exposed in the tussock on the edge of the beach, and I think it had been exposed through the activity of the fur seal. So they were quite keen to have a look and do a bit of excavation. You can see the archaeologists, they just landed on the beach, getting their stuff set up. The area in question is, if I can move, is up here. That's where the you can just see the edge of the remains there. This was our vessel, Hans Hansen, just waiting for us out in the bay. Again, you can see what an amazing day it was. It meant that we could get some really good data using the drone. So we flew the mission at 100 metres above ground level. I think we used about 7 or 8 batteries to get the extent that we did. I think we mapped nearly 200 hectares, which I'll show you on the next slide. So this was a 3D view of the data we collected. So this is Wanderer Ridge on the right hand side, and on the left, just to the left of the building here, there's a big colony of black-browed albatross there, and this is the beach that the archaeologists were working on. This was the site of the ceiling hut. This is, I guess, a zoom in. This is an orthomosaic. So down here is the, there's a platform for doing seal research. So I think it's called, is it Fur Seal Beach? Or there's a beach, basically there's a beach there where it's quite heavily studied. And here is Wanderer Ridge. And I guess this shows the resolution of the imagery we were collecting. This was about, 2.5 centimetres per pixel resolution. You can, in theory, see how many you can count. There's 4 wanderers on there, on nests, plus a fur seal. So there's one there, wanderer there. Oh, my mouse has gone. There, and there's a fur seal there. So you can really see the utility of this type of imagery for, I guess, doing population counts. This is that black-browed albatross colony I was telling you about. So you can see all the chicks right at the top on the nest, and further down you can see some of the adults, the black and white plumage. This is the archaeological site. So as I said, part of my mission was to support the archaeology. We've got some really good imagery of the beach and of the dig site. That's Dion, busy digging. And again, you can see how stunning the weather was, how lucky we were. And these are some of the sort of wooden structures that they were uncovering as part of the archaeological dig on Bird Island. Pieces of tripod, whale bones, and I guess this is the edge of a wall on the left, which goes down to like a path down to the beach. The rest of the structure is actually probably inside that tussock slope on the edge of the beach. So I guess as it becomes more eroded, it's going to become more exposed. As well as doing the drone survey, I was quite keen to get some ground validation at Bird Island. So the warden, the base commander took us up onto the ridge to get some ground validation points. This is a wanderer sitting on a nest. we're also lucky to see a pair of wanderers doing a courtship display up on the ridge in the distance. And then it was time to leave. So we actually got a massive amount done at Birdline, much more than I expected we'd get done because of the weather, which was great. But it was then transiting down the south side of South Georgia, round to Wilson Harbour. This was an important site for the archaeological guys. And for me, it's an opportunity to collect more ground validation data for those broad-scale models that we've been developing. As we were going down the south side, the weather deteriorated. It's quite a moody sky, and we had a few days of gales. This is us with a briefing just before we head ashore, and this is us getting ashore on Wilson Harbour. There's quite a few king penguins around, fur seals as well. There's Gen 2 colonies. So this is a really interesting image. It shows where an old Gen 2 colony was, but obviously it's been enriched by the guano from the penguins, and it's a great seedbed for new tussock beds. So this is really young tussock plants growing up. The Gen 2s have moved on to another location, but you can see, I guess it's the cycle of penguins residing there, moving on, really fertile ground, and new tussock beds grow up. Giff, who's into his habitat restoration, got very excited when he saw this. There's a lot of walking around with the GPS, getting ground validation points. It was pretty snowy right on top of the ridge, up in the sort of the Fairfield area. And that night was Shrove Tuesday. So there was a lot of Americans and citizen scientists. They didn't really get the idea about pancakes. So we had to go making pancakes for them. I think Fede, the master, was a bit worried about his ceiling. It survived. And then the next day, despite the bad weather, we headed on to Nilazahullet, which is further down on the south coast. This was a big site for the archaeologists. There was relics. There's a tripod down in that sort of bottom left-hand corner. So there obviously been old structures there previously from the ceiling. And for me, again, it was an opportunity to get out and collect ground validation data. It was too windy for droning, which is a shame, but this is some of the ceiling archaeology. There's obviously the wooden structures from an old hut, and there was a tripod that was sort of half buried, which they were excavating. A really important find in the bottom right-hand corner, that's a ceiling lance, and it's actually got the, it's wrapped in seal skin. So they got very, very excited about that. What they could do is, these are some of the relics, artifacts they picked up, and they were able to take these to the Grytviken Museum, document them, archive them, catalogue them, and so on. So after Nilazahullet, we carried on down south to Peggotty Bluff. So for those of you that know South Georgia and Shackleton story, so Peggotty Bluff was where Shackleton landed. Apparently there is a cave just in here where they turned the boat over. And this is where he started his long hike over to Stromness. Again, we were seeking shelter from the weather. It looks calm, but it was pretty windy, so it was too windy for any droning. But again, opportunity to get out and collect data, get the ground validation data for those habitat models. And yeah, this really pretty scenery. And then the long steam down to Larson. So Larson's right at the bottom of South Georgia. It was quite rough. We wanted, there were some priority areas for the archaeologists on the way down, but it was too rough to go in there. I think the south west coast is notoriously bad for South Georgia, as in it's very hard to land, it's very steep, lots of cliffs, and really just challenging from a sort of boating perspective. So we carried on steaming down. There's a lot of wildlife around, albatross, prions, fur seals, and then off Anakoff Island there was some humpbacks feeding, and you can see all the prions around as well. And finally made it to Larson, and as we came into Larson, HMS Clyde was coming out, which is quite interesting. Really quite wet, snowy. This feels very fjordic. It feels very much like, I guess, Norway. Very steep sides. And apparently this used to be a lot more icebound than it is now. This is a site where has really interesting, I guess, plant communities, but also it has the only land-based population of Weddell seals. These normally breed in Antarctica on the ice, so to see them on land is quite rare. And then onwards from Larsen Harbour, just around the corner to Albatross Cove. So Albatross Cove is, I guess, one of the crucial sites for the archaeologists, and for me, it was crucial. It was also important. It's a big tourist site. There was interest from government of South Georgia and other stakeholders to actually look at what was there, try and get an environmental baseline, so that if there's any changes in the future, they can be, captured, documented, and if necessary, other management are taken as well. So this was looking at the area of interest to the archaeologists. There was an old hut that was located in the cliff, in the rocky cliff here. You can see on the left the fur seals obviously getting quite excited, so they want to come over and have a look. But this area had some really important finds from I guess the archaeological project perspective. They were finding things like clay pipes intact, so they even had the manufacturers stamped on them, so they could have a look and work out where they'd come from. That's the guys at work. There, as he said, clay pipe. And I guess much like Elzerhull, that area used to be completely covered in tussock, and I guess the erosion from the fur seals has really sort of eroded that and has left sort of the exposed rocky wooden structures of the sealing hut. And through their surveys, through the drone imagery that we collected with a drone, they can start to create detailed plans of what's there and what would have been there in the past. Stone walls, the tussock walls, the collapsed roof, and even around the corner there was a hearth. You can see like the burnt charred wall on the hearth, which is quite interesting as well. And there is the pipe that everyone got very excited about. On the other side of Albatross Cove, so this is more from the tourism perspective. There's a big macaroni colony, so lots of cruise ships come in and visit this. So I guess from a mapping perspective, this was an area of interest. So you can start documenting if there's erosion through, particular trails. These are the macaronis in their colony, and a skua eating a macaroni, or what used to be a macaroni. And these are the dense point clouds that we created from our drone survey. So again, this was flown at 100 metres above ground level, probably about 150 to 170 hectares we covered. I think we're pretty much forced to stop basically as the snow set in. So it's trying to time the surveys between, I guess, the weather windows you had, which was, I guess, a bit of a challenge, but there's a lot of life there. So on the top left, you've got leopard seal on the rocks. The bottom left are the South Georgia pintails. So these are another sort of nesting bird that was impacted by the rats. So they've made a real, I guess, a big comeback since the eradication project. Got elephant seals in the middle, and then there's a big chinstrap colony across the bay. So these guys were, I guess, stragglers molting. We're next to Cooper Island, and so even though there's obviously strict protocols of having all the lights off at night on the boat, there were still diving petrels landing on the boat. So these guys were just held up into the wind. It was quite breezy, and then they could get settled down and fly off, rather than getting all into the under the decking and all around the ship where there was probably oil and stuff around. So yeah, it was quite important to get them off the boat as quickly as possible. Then we moved on to Gold Harbour. So Gold Harbour and Gold Head, we're now coming round the bottom of South Georgia up the north-eastern side. Gold Harbour has quite an impressive hanging glacier. And there's quite a few elephant seals. So Dion was saying that in the breeding season you pretty much can't walk on the beach because there's so many seals around. I'll hasten to add I was zoomed in on my camera. Hence that's why the penguin looks really close. Yeah, I'd advise to get too close to these guys. We were working, there was a cruise ship with passengers offshore when we arrived, and we waited till those guys had left. Then we could start the drone mission. And the mission we did, I guess, the evening before it got too dark, and then we got up really early the next morning and finished the mission. That's me and Dion, sort of on top of the ridge. You can see, if I go back actually, you can see on the right hand side is the path caused by the tourists on their trip. So I guess from a tourism management perspective, it's important to know how much impact tourism is having, if they're following the same path, if they're going off and doing different things. So you can really see the utility of collecting data such as this. And from this data, we can create our 3D dense point clouds, from which you can create elevation models. But more importantly, and from the mapping perspective, we can create orthomosaics, which you can then feed into our habitat models. So this is some of the outputs that the project's produced for South Georgia Government. And from that, and using ground truthing data that we've collected, we can create these fine-scale habitat maps, which I guess are the first satellite and aerial survey-derived habitat maps for South Georgia. Moving on from Gold Head, we moved down to Coppin Point in Royal Bay. So this was a site of the first International Polar Year expedition in 1882. It was a German research station. From the archaeological perspective, obviously there's a lot of interest, but Royal Bay is really, really windy. So there's glaciers just around the corner and the winds howl down here. So we could fly the drone mission, but it was a lot low. We flew at 30 metres above ground level, which is probably the highest we could fly. Interestingly, they lived here for a couple of months. They looked at the transit of Venus in 1882, and also they had tidal recording kit which actually measured the effects of the Krakatoa eruption in 27th of August 1883. This is a sort of 3D model of the data we collected with the drone, the orthomosaic, so the composite image from all the images we collected. And here you can see some of the structures still remaining from the research station. This was one of the huts, and this was the transit of Venus equipment, the circular metal structure with the, you can see the ground control point above it, and also some fur seal pups just at the bottom left. On to Ocean Harbour. So Ocean Harbour for me was important from a ground truthing perspective. From an archaeological perspective, it was the site of an old whaling station, but also there was a lot of there was graves there from sealers. And it was also the site of the first reindeer introduction to South Georgia. So there was 3 males and 7 females, and they were known as the Bath herd. Obviously they've now been eradicated, and actually the habitats are making quite a significant change, that things are sort of restoring to how they were before, and I'll show you some of the evidence just in a bit. Godtool was our next stop. Again, it was too windy and wet for droning, unfortunately, but this again was the site of an old whaling station. I got to go ashore to collect ground validation data. Obviously relics from the reindeer on the left, and just you can see I guess the amount of whale bones on the beach from where the old whaling station was. So then we got to King Edward Point and Grytviken. So King Edward Point is where the research station is. So there's scientists that overwinter there. And also Grytviken, I guess, where a lot of the tourists come in. There's a museum there run by the South Georgia Heritage Trust. And this is where the archaeologists did a lot of sort of cataloguing and archiving of the artefacts they'd collected so far. Also cleared customs and went cleared biosecurity. It was really windy when we arrived. We had a lot of plans to do drone surveys on the walk across to Myviken and also across the other side from KP, but it was too windy. And then when the wind stopped, the snow started, and it turned to that, which really, yeah, it had a significant impact on what we can achieve. You can't really drone in the snow because you can't see what's on the ground, and it's very hard to ground truth as well. So, yeah, a bit frustrating. But I think the lesson to learn from South Georgia is the weather changes an awful lot, and you just need to be flexible. These guys didn't mind. They quite liked it, to be honest. So interestingly, we left a lot of the snow in Grytviken and KP. We came around the corner to King Haakon Bay, and there was no snow in low-lying areas at all. So it meant that myself and Ollie could focus on doing some drone mapping at Jason Harbour, and then the archaeologists carried on round to Carlita Bay. They were looking at some caves where sealers had been using. So we got to go ashore. There's a little hut, like a refuge hut there, which came in useful later. Taking wind measurements to check it was okay for droning, and then getting the drone up. This guy on the right had a strange fascination with the landing pad, so we had to try and move him off as we were trying to land the drone. And then it started snowing again. So yeah, we had to seek refuge in the hut. Checking all the supplies were all okay. And there's randomly there's a visitor's book in there as well, which is quite strange. I didn't expect to see that. Yeah, so we sat out the weather, waited for it to get better, and it did, and we got to collect this data. So this is the 3D image of Jason Harbour. Again, another important visitor site. And this is the orthomosaic. You can see, I guess, the glacial runoff on the left of colouring the water, making it quite turbid. And quite interestingly, we'll zoom in next to an area just up here, and also an area around here. So the area at the top, you see the tracks there, reindeer tracks. So I guess the reindeers have gone quite a few years now, but there's still evidence of where they've been walking. And these areas here, just around the edge, that's all erosion caused by sort of reindeer impact. So you can actually start to see that some of the vegetation is recovering. And I think these areas will be really key to look into the future from a monitoring perspective to see how these habitats are recovering sort of post-reindeer eradication. The rest of the area, it's sort of elephant seal sort of wallows. It would have once been covered completely by tussock, but at the moment, I guess a lot of the tussock had been grazed out by the reindeers. So it's really a lot of poa, which is, I guess, an invasive grass, which is everywhere, and other grasses. So actually, you can see the tussock starting to come back now that there's not the grazing pressure. So that's going to be a really interesting area to look forward to in the future, to see how it's changing and how the sort of habitat's restoring post-reindeer. So we've got a really good data set for Jason Harbour. Quite fortunate with the weather, despite the snow showers. And then it was on to Fortuna Bay. And I guess Fortuna Bay as well, we were exceptionally lucky with the weather. Again, blue skies, little to no wind, which meant we could get a lot of data captured with the drone. And also the archaeologists were looking at a cave in Whistle Cove where sealers had been using it. And part of the permitting process is making sure that you can, take the drone off away from wildlife. That's fine, but the problem is then when the wildlife starts to come and approach you as you're sitting down flying the drone. So part of the job of the observer is actually to make sure that he's aware of what's happening when I'm focusing on flying the drone. This is Fortuna Bay. So we're coming towards, there's a sort of waterfall up on the hillside. And that slope on the other side, that's where the walk goes from Fortuna across to Stromness. So that's the last part of the Shackleton walk that you can do, and an important habitat for sort of burrowing diving petrels on the scree slope. This is the archaeologists working away in the cave, so they're doing a lot of excavations. I think they found some military memorabilia as well as sealing stuff. And from a tourism perspective, Fortuna Bays has a big king penguin colony, you can see there. So I guess there was a priority to get this area mapped, sort of from a tourism perspective, get a good baseline, so you can start to see if there's any changes. But also, I guess, from a baseline perspective and useful data, that's a 3D view from the drone imagery. From the orthomosaic, this is again was at 100 metres above ground level, but you can start to see the resolution we can get. So this is, I guess, part of the mosaic. You can see the brown king penguin chicks in the centre, and then the adults all around. So this type of data is really useful for population estimates as well. Then on to our penultimate stop, which was Prince Olav Harbour, one of the disused whaling stations. The weather started off amazingly, so my priority was to get ground validation points for my modelling. The archaeologists were working on a site adjacent to where the whaling station was. And then it got bad. There was a bit of snow, bit of cloud, and then it got really bad. Almost so bad that you could hardly stand up in it. So again, one of the challenges of working down in South Georgia, the weather can change from being a lovely day to this in, what, less than an hour? So yeah, quite challenging. Then on to Prine Island. So Prine Island has a new boardwalk system in place. Well, I guess it's not new now, but it was fairly new. And from a tourism perspective, that's great because you can keep the tourists, on the boardwalk. Within our permitting, we have permission to go off to collect data for the ground truth and data for the habitat maps. And I guess it's an important area for wandering albatross. There's a lot of research happening on Bird Island, on Prine Island. And then that same day we moved across to Salisbury Plain and Start Point. So Start Point was important from the archaeological perspective. Quite recently there had been a ceiling hut uncovered, or the remains of a hut. And from my perspective, I was always collecting imagery for them, and it was droneable just. It was a bit drizzly to start with, but it cleared up. But also there was a chance to get ground validation data for the habitat models as well. And of all the places I've flown a drone, Start Point was probably the most challenging because literally there were penguins everywhere, and you could find a very safe place to take off the drone, and then within 5 minutes the space would be filled with penguins coming to see what you're doing. So yeah, quite tricky. And when you left stuff around, they just would not leave it alone. They would come up and see what it was, and generally be a nuisance. And just to show you how much wildlife there was, there's just literally it's like a paddling pool full of fur seal pups, and the beach is just full of king penguins and fur seals. I think there were some big fur seals sort of in the middle. So yeah, it was, I don't think I've ever seen so much wildlife. It was literally, it was hooching. This is where the archaeologists were working. So you can see the furry seal pups trying to get into the dig site. So this is the remains of an old hut that they've been excavating. You can see Dion there being chased by furry pups at the bottom. But it gives you a real perspective of, I guess, how much life is there, and actually trying to work in those environments, not just the weather, but trying to work around all the wildlife to get the stuff that you had to get done. at the same time respecting having a safe distance and so on. Then I guess it was our trip home, which was 5.5 days of pretty rough weather. More people disappearing in cabins for 5 days. We saw some hourglass dolphins. So these guys sort of swam with us for a bit on the way home. And then, yeah, we had obviously quite a few albatross, and then I guess the last team shot as we got back into Stanley. So all in all, it was a really successful trip. It highlighted for me the benefits of collaborating. So my project couldn't have afforded to go down to South Georgia by itself, but working with the archaeological project, I could help them collect data, so the drone imagery which supported their project. And I guess vice versa, I got to go to places to collect my data for my project, which would never have happened if that had been the case. So yeah, I guess a big thank you to all the partners, to Darwin, to the South Georgia Heritage Trust, to Iridium and MLSL, and Coyote Expeditions on the Hans Hansen. So yeah, it was. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, the work the archaeologists were doing, the excavations of the huts and the clay pipes and the tripods, what time period are we talking about now?
As in how long they were working, or?
No, from what, how old are they?
Oh, the huts. I might look to Helen here, but
Early 1900s?
yeah. I guess sealing came after whaling? Before whaling, okay.
Early 1900s.
Yeah.
At the start it said air, sea and land.
Yes.
Didn't show it from the sea in the videos.
No, it didn't. I had to be quite ruthless with cutting down. Yeah, the first cut was quite long, so it had to be one. I had to condense 9,000 photos into about 50, and then yeah, trying to pick sort of representative imagery from the drone, but also from sea was quite challenging. So I'm sorry. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed it.